Hello, everyone. My name is Sydney Harrison, and today I'll be presenting my leadership analysis project on Edwin Catmull, the co founder and former president of Pixar Animation Studios. Throughout this presentation, I'll examine Catmull's leadership style and culture he helped create at Pixar, and how his collaborative approach to leadership challenged me to re examine my understanding of inclusive leadership. While Catmull is often associated with collaboration and innovation, this project gave me the opportunity to analyze his leadership through the lens of inclusive leadership and reflect on what I learned throughout this course. Before we begin, I'd like to give you a brief overview of the presentation. I'll start by introducing Ed Catmull and discuss the history of both his career at Pixar Animation Studio to provide some context of his leadership. From there, I'll examine Catmull's leadership style and explain how he created a culture built on collaboration, creativity, and continuous learning. Next, I'll evaluate his leadership from an ethical perspective before analyzing his leadership through the lens of inclusive leadership theory, which is the primary leadership framework I'll be using throughout this presentation. I'll then conclude by sharing my personal reflections on what I learned from researching Ed, how his project influenced my understanding of leadership, and why I believe his leadership continues to have an impact on organizations beyond the film industry. Finally, I'll summarize the key points and close with my overall evaluation of his leadership. Before discussing Ed Catmull's leadership style, it's important to understand who he is and why he became such an influential leader. Words like collaborative, innovative, and visionary are often used to describe Ed Catmull and his approach to leadership. Catmull is a computer scientist entrepreneur and the co founder of Pixar Anima- Animation Studios. Although many people recognize Pixar for its award winning films, I believe Catmull's greatest contribution was organizational culture he helped create behind the scenes. He served as president of Pixar from 1986 until 2019 and later became the president of Walt Disney Animation Studios after Disney acquired Pixar in 2006. During his leadership, Pixar produced some of the most successful animation films in history. At the same time, Catmull gained recognition for creating a workplace culture that encouraged creativity and collaboration. Rather than separating employees into isolated departments, he transformed the way creative teams work together by encouraging open communication, honest feedback, and continuous improvement. His leadership philosophy is one of the reasons I believe the inclusive leadership framework aligns so well with his leadership style and why I chose him for this analysis. One of the biggest lessons I learned from researching Ed was that Pixar's success was never about one person. Catmull believed that great ideas came from putting the right people together and creating a workplace culture where everyone felt comfortable contributing. Rather than expecting employees to simply follow directions, he encouraged them to think independently, challenge ideas respectfully, and take creative risks. I found Kelly's followership typology especially helpful in understanding Pixar's culture. Kelly explains that followers differ in both their level of independent thinking and their level of active engagement. Organizations naturally include different follower types, but Catmull intentionally created an environment where employees were encouraged to become more engaged, think independently, and contribute their ideas regardless of their position. Rather than viewing employees as people who simply completed assigned tasks, Catmull empowered them to become active contributors to the organization's success. I believe that philosophy transformed employees from followers into partners in Pixar's creative process. While researching Ed Catmull, I kept asking myself the same question. Did Ed Catmull demonstrate ethical leadership? The conclusion I came to was it depends. After reviewing interviews, Creative Inc., and Pixar leadership philosophy, I believe he did. However, I don't believe he was an ethical leader because he was perfect. Instead, I believe he intentionally created an environment where people felt respected, trusted, and encouraged to contribute their best ideas. The framework that best supports my conclusion is the five principles of ethical leadership, which include respect, service, justice, honesty, and community. Throughout his career, Catmull consistently demonstrated these principles. He respected employees by encouraging every voice to be heard, regardless of job title. He practiced service by removing barriers that prevented creativity rather than controlling every decision. He promoted justice by evaluating ideas based on their quality instead of the position of the person presenting them. His emphasis on honest feedback throughout the Brain Trust reflected integrity and transparency, while his focus on collaboration created a strong sense of community throughout Pixar. To me, ethical leadership means creating an environment where people are treated fairly, trusted to contribute, and empowered to succeed. I believe Ed Catmull dis- demonstrated those qualities throughout his leadership. Throughout this presentation, I've discussed Ed Catmull's collaborative culture, the role employees played in Pixar's success, and the ethical environment he worked to create. As I continued my research, I realized that one leadership theory connected all of these ideas: inclusive leadership. In our textbook, inclusive leadership focuses on creating an environment where people feel valued, respected, and encouraged to contribute their unique perspectives rather than expecting everyone to think the same way. Inclusive leaders recognize the innovation comes from different backgrounds, experiences, and viewpoints. They build trust, encourage participation, and create psychological safety so employees feel comfortable sharing ideas and challenging existing processes. What stood out to me was the inclusive leadership isn't simply about including everyone in every conversation. It's about creating a culture where people feel empowered to contribute because they know their opinions matter. As I learned more about the leadership theories in this course, I realized this philosophy closely aligned with the culture Ed Catmull intentionally built at Pixar. After learning more about inclusive leadership, I began looking for evidence throughout Pixar's culture. The more I researched, the more I concluded that Ed Catmull didn't simply encourage collaboration. He intentionally created an environment where employees felt empowered to contribute their ideas. One of the strongest examples of this was Pixar's Brain Trust meetings. These meetings brought together directors, writers, artists, and other professional creatives to openly discuss films that were still in development. What made the Brain Trust unique was the ideas were evaluated based on their quality rather than their job title of the person presenting them. Employees were encouraged to challenge ideas, ask questions, and provide honest feedback without fear of criticism or retaliation. I now realize collaboration wasn't the strategy, it was the outcome. By creating a psychological safety and empowering employees to share their perspectives. Catman built a culture where innovation could thrive. While researching for this project, I came across countless of interviews and articles about Ed Catmull, but the one source I kept returning to was his book Creative Inc. Throughout the reading, I learned so much, not just about Pixar, but the organizational culture and what can happen when a workplace is built on empowerment, trust, and active listening. What stood out to me the most was Catmull's honesty. He openly discusses his own mistakes and acknowledges that developing as a leader is an ongoing process and that no leader is perfect. Reading his personal reflections gave me a much better understanding of who he was as a leader and why Pixar became successful. More importantly, it helped me understand that great leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating an environment where other people can succeed. At the conclusion of this project, I realized that while I learned a great deal about the history of Pixar and the leadership of Ed Catmull, I also learned a lot about myself. Before beginning this assignment, I had placed Catmull into a category of collaborative leaders. However, after studying the leadership theories from this course, I realized he could also be viewed as an inclusive leader. This leadership style intrigued me because I realized it's a type of workplace culture I hope to be a part of after I graduate. People spend a significant amount of their lives at work, and I want to know that my voice and opinion matters. Throughout this project, I've gained a greater appreciation for the ideas of active listening and empowerment. I hope that one day I can help create or simply be a part of a workplace where employees feel empowered to share their ideas regardless of their job titles. Most importantly, I learned that effective leadership often requires setting personal egos aside so that collaboration, trust, and innovation can truly thrive. As I conclude this presentation, I hope I've shown that Ed Catmull's success wasn't simply the result of producing great films. His greatest contribution wasn't just animation, but to create a workplace culture where employees felt respected, empowered, and encouraged to contribute their ideas. Throughout this project, I learned that leadership is about much more than managing people or making decisions. It's about intentionally creating an environment built on trust, collaboration, and the psychological safety to take risks and learn from failure. Looking back, I believe inclusive leadership best explains Catmull's leadership style because it connects the culture he built, the way employees contributed, and the values he demonstrated throughout his career. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed learning about Ed Catmull's leadership as much as I enjoyed researching it.